Welcome, everyone, to Black Hat 2024 Unwrapped. I'm John Cassell, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my esteemed colleagues, Blaze Fellow
Thank you, John.
and Rocco Fiore.
Hang 10, John. Good to be here.
Whether you are among the lucky ones who braved the heat of Las Vegas for Black Hat and DEF CON, or you're tuning in to catch up on what you may have missed, we're here to bring you the highlights and insights to what matters most. The Syxsense team, of course, was at Black Hat this year and really enjoyed meeting new faces at our booth, plenty of great relationships. We also hope that you had an incredible time, collected some unforgettable swag, and most importantly, walked away with invaluable knowledge of cutting edge trends and exploits shaping the security landscape. If you didn't make it this year, don't worry. The next few minutes will immerse you in some of the most significant topics from Black Hat 2024. Before we talk about the topics and transition into some further depth, one brief note on a topic that we all agreed was most important. At Black Hat 2024, one of the keynotes, Democracy's Biggest Year, the fight for secure elections around the world, emphasized the obvious critical importance of safeguarding election integrity. With 2024 marking an historic year for global democracy, where, according to their write-up, over 2 billion voters worldwide participate in shaping their nation's futures, the session highlighted the heightened risks posed by cyber threats, foreign interference, and emerging technologies like generative AI. The takeaway is clear. Securing elections is not just a technical challenge, but a universal imperative. As we navigate this pivotal year, the resilience in democratic processes must be fortified to ensure that the gains of 2024 are not just a moment, but a turning point in the global fight for democracy. There's my quick pitch on that. Today, we zeroed in, however, on 3 additional standout sessions that you simply can't afford to overlook. Windows downgrade attacks using Windows updates by Safe Breach, understanding and reducing supply chain and software vulnerability risks by ThreatLocker, and 15 ways to break your Copilot by Zenity. Of course, we'll wrap up some final thoughts on the broader implications of these sessions and what they have on the cybersecurity community. But first, Blaze, let's hear about Windows Downdate.
Thank you, John. If you're familiar also with our 0 Day to Everyday series, I brought this up in our most recent podcast. So check it out if you'd like to hear that as well. I'm bringing it up again because of its relevancy and potential for future attacks. If you haven't seen or heard about a Downdate attack, well, Safe Breach's security researcher, Alon Lviv, unveiled 2 0-day vulnerabilities that could allow threat actors to perform downgrade attacks on fully updated or patched Windows systems, which effectively reintroduces old vulnerabilities thought to be taken care of already by the deployed patch. He utilized a tool he created but did not make public, which was called Windows Downdate, which downgrading updates and bypasses all verification steps, including integrity verification and trusted installer enforcement. Performing a downgrade or rollback attacks are what they sound like, where they revert otherwise immune or up-to-date software, which could be drivers, DLLs, and even the NT kernel to an older version, which is now vulnerable to any number of previously patched vulnerabilities, which can then be exploited. Lviv found interest in this path of exploitation in 2023 when the Black Lotus UEFI bootkit employed a downgrade attack to bypass secure boot. They didn't need to come up with a new 0 day. They already had a previous exploit in mind, so the malware downgraded the Windows Boot Manager to a version vulnerable to CVE 2022-21894 to bypass secure boot. Black Lotus was then able to disable other OS security mechanisms and gain persistence in impacted systems. The Black Lotus UEFI bootkit sent shockwaves throughout the cybersecurity community, as it was capable of running on fully patched and up-to-date Windows 11 systems with Secure Boot enabled. While Microsoft patched Secure Boot extensively against downgrade attacks, Lviv couldn't help but wonder whether downgrade protection was added anywhere else in the Windows OS. So, Microsoft, in coordination with the Black Hat Talk, issued advisories for the 2 unpatched 0 days. Lviv found a flaw in the update process that he was able to take advantage of because of running as an elevated trusted installer is considered malicious, which would be detected by DDRs. With this flow that he discovered, he found a registry key to track the update process and was able to edit the hard link file action to downgrade system files by manipulating trusted installer, allowing for a complete Windows update takeover. The OS shows as fully patched because it just performed a patch and didn't uninstall anything. Then for persistency, new updates will ignore the action list and install empty updates, and by patching SFC to never detect or repair corruptions, it is now irreversible. The Windows solution to this was to deprivilege the kernel by introducing virtualization-based security, or VBS. This introduces many security features and dependencies, making Windows more secure using Hyper-V. Lviv worked to disable VBS, thinking it would be easier than dealing with it, but it utilizes UEFI lock that holds the VBS configuration in the UEFI boot service. This process can only be accessed during boot, which assumes signed code by Microsoft and even requires physical approval. Fast forward a little for the sake of time, but combining the downgrade flow and the UEFI lock bypass, which he discovered, he was able to achieve credential extraction. With these, he was able to disable VBS, use CVE 2021-27090, which at the time fixed the secure kernel privilege escalation to provide secure kernel privilege, which then led to downgrading Hyper-V itself. The two track CVEs are CVE 2024-38202, which is the Windows Update Stack Elevation of Privilege Vulnerability, and then CVE 2024-21302, which is the Windows Secure Kernel Mode Elevation of Privilege Vulnerability. So it's the protections we can have in place. Those interested in taking those actions to mitigate some of the risks would be in this downdate attack can be found in the security advisory for the mentioned 21302. Of those, some of those included are auditing users who are authorized to perform system restore and update operations and limiting that number of people, implementing access control lists, configuring event monitoring for when elevated privileges are used or update files are modified, monitoring modifications and replacement of files associated with virtualization-based security and system file backup. And probably one of the more risky solutions for those looking for more security, Microsoft does offer an update, KB 504-2562, which mitigates the severity of the above 21302. And with this installs, it outdates versions of VBS system files are added to the revoked list and can no longer be run on an updated computer, which of course carries its own risks. Currently, there is no evidence that these vulnerabilities are being exploited in the wild. So with that in mind, guys, do you want to talk about what your view on something like the future of downdate attack would look like in the environments that we have today?
It's definitely concerning. Obviously, it's based on a prior attack as well, so it's more exploitation down the line. But something I find it interesting, and I don't want to talk a lot about, of course, what we do as a business, but as I like the the general chatter that we're talking about here on this topic, but detection criteria and how we can actually find from a third-party standpoint whether updates are or aren't necessary. I think that that's an important aspect when it came to the downdate. Well, of course, the POC there. So at the very end of it, I think he ends up running Windows Update Detection, and it states that the device is fully patched. There aren't any issues. That's using built-in Windows detection. I would look to a third party to determine, are the binaries there? Is it actually up to date? Yes or no? Because sure, it's simple to go to Windows Update directly and see that, yeah, the system thinks it's patched. But if you're using proprietary detection criteria to find that out, using a network scanner, it's another detection method, you'd find out real fast. System is not patched, because we don't just go to the the Windows Update and say, are you good? There's a lot more to it.
I think it really highlights the importance of non-patch vulnerabilities and configuration adjustments being made, because as we see here, it's not too difficult to employ this. I would say it's actually probably more difficult than a lot of the other simpler successful attack chains we see out there. But employing things like CIS benchmarks, hardening, other configuration vulnerabilities that aren't have nothing to do with patching or updating your equipment is necessary to minimize traversal once inside a network, etc. So it just goes to show you that this is an attack surface that could easily be manipulated, and you take a zero trust approach and be able to fortify defenses around it as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think it's great that we're exploring this before it is a problem and working to kind of prevent something that could be a problem in the future. The whole point of patching something is not necessarily to set and forget, but also to kind of understand, your environment and how you can move forward. And I love that there's so much conversation about making this better. But just like everything, security versus usability is a double-edged sword. So as you try to make things easier, we also find drawbacks to making that process easier. With that in mind, I'd like to hand it over to John, who can explore some of the drawbacks to using Copilot, but also some of the advantages, maybe. John?
Yeah, appreciate it. So a topic that I thought was very interesting was provided by Michael probably pronouncing this incorrectly, Barjuri, from Zenity. He seek to challenge Microsoft's Secure Future Initiative claims, from Microsoft claiming that that it's secure by design and secure by default. And of course, most professionals are looking for a significant increase in priority. Problem is that, of course, productivity, not a lot focused on, of course, an increase in security. Microsoft AI allows us to build our custom copilots, but then as well extend Microsoft's copilots. So what Michael discussed in his particular topic, he painted this story, and I don't want to get too into the entire story because he had a counter at the bottom of the screen for every bad thing that basically the user was doing. And I can, of course, get into it, basically all 15, but there's more than that as well that his topic really goes into. So again, to keep it short, he painted the story with Jack, a CISO at a Fortune 500 company, on his first day on the job. He joked that, of course, how do you know it's his first day? Well, he's a CISO and he's smiling. Jill is the other subject of the story, in which she works in the HR department doing significant manual and repetitive work. And of course, she recently heard about Microsoft Copilot, and the journey starts from there. It just pretty much just snowballs into this thing in terms of every bad decision she made. But then as well, going back to the secure by default claims that Microsoft has made, there are a number of problems here in the story. She basically decides to build a number of automated routines with her Copilot Studio, initially choosing Teams, but fails to use the correct authentication. So it starts all off with no authentication. Obviously, an initial big no-no, as I tell my toddler. Another issue is that Copilot is getting sensitive information from SharePoint by leveraging Jill's hard-coded credentials or credential sharing as a service. So obviously poses a huge issue with regard to logging, as there be no distinction in where Jill's account is actually used. Going beyond from there's so many other items. I have this all documented here. It's really crazy if you get a chance to watch it. He did a great job, and actually it was one of his 2 topics. He actually had another one they did the next day at Black Hat too, all around the same issues with low and no code approaches, and how sometimes your UI is going to work against you. It's basically the main gist of this. The attacker at the very end of this story can gain privilege escalation to the transcript viewer, as the web UI clearly wouldn't show all transcripts, but the API is still exposed, so the attacker can simply change the request. This was actually a vulnerability previously resolved by Microsoft thanks to the efforts of Michael's team earlier this year. And basically the end of it, he's got 15 ways in which you can break Copilot. Again, a number of functions in the underlying security of Copilot Studio. An organization should be, of course, going back to what Rocco said, CIS benchmarks, hardening proactively before you give technology to your users. They should be restricted, of course, in these areas, but in this story, they're not very much restricted. It goes on with additional issues beyond 15. So he starts it, of course, saying there are going to be 15 topics. Well, there are actually 17 issues at the very end of this. Authentication was enabled. However, the attacker can still be active, as another option requires that the users have to log in, and that was not enabled by default. Another insecure default with over-reliance on AI, prompt injection, leads to sensitive data leak, since Jill's credentials are still allowing access to the internal SharePoint. A huge problem. He bashed Power Platform DLP quite a few times, stating that it's definitely not a DLP. It's just a bunch of checkboxes, a bunch of sliders and radio buttons, and basically compared it to S3 buckets with Amazon, some of the issues that existed in recent years, in which all they did was add a bunch of access controls to solve the situation, but not really going back to the drawing board and deciding, is there a different way of doing this? They also released Copilot Hunter, which basically helped in the last piece, in which the attacker was manipulating the requests And Copilot Hunter apparently was also measured up by Zenity across Fortune 500 companies. They hooked into almost every internal tenant and retrieved a bunch of information. This was all disclosed to a number of those organizations. I'm sure if a question came up in the audience, who are those organizations? He's not going to tell you. But there were apparently a lot, and some of them even providing PII directly to the attacker through AI. He concluded basically at the end of this to harden the environment, follow the frameworks, and continue to tread carefully in any new adoption of technology. I'm sure all three of us would agree there. Rocco, going back to something you mentioned though, for your topic, you mentioned supply chain. Can you tell us a little bit more about software vulnerability risks?
For sure. So we all chose a topic. Obviously, I out of all the briefings and all the topics at Black Hat, I chose the one that piqued my interest the most was Danny Jenkins' speech about supply chain, which interesting because I didn't think I'd choose one of the vendor related ones, it being like a commercial for ThreatLocker, but Danny Jenkins always has, regardless if you're talking about his own product or not, very interesting details within his presentations. And ThreatLocker is a product that we really have nothing but good things to say about. So within his presentation, he starts off by talking about the nature of cloud security versus endpoint security, how really it seems like everything's shifting to cloud security, but in fact, a lot of the damage that we've seen done exploited in the wild is still at the endpoint level. This is due to the decentralized nature of endpoints. It's harder, it may be easier to exfiltrate from a central location, right, in the cloud, but it is harder to have and maintain security controls on decentralized endpoints. And we see that every day at Syxsense. So the endpoint is where we need to focus. And specifically, and this is where it ties directly into ThreatLocker, is application control. What ThreatLocker's platform does, they use a deny by default approach that blocks all software that's running unless it is explicitly allowed. And he gives great reason for this. A lot of the biggest attacks, most exploited attacks we've seen in the past couple of years have been through softwares, just the abuse of everyday softwares. With Felina, he gives an example, abusing macros using Word. And that attack chain was very straightforward. And it was about a month before Microsoft even had any type of solution for it. Here's Syxsense plug. Our plug is we had a solution next day, actually. So being a customer of ours at the time, it was very beneficial to close that gap. But the same goes for Log4j, where Log4j is an abuse of the Log4j module. And really, what he's getting at across all of these is that even if it's Microsoft software, or especially if it's Microsoft software too, but any software is really a black box into the abuse that can be done through it by threat actors, which really gives rise to the zero trust approach that ThreatLocker is known for, that Syxsense helps enable as well, is this assume breach philosophy. Assume that your endpoints are breached, networks breached, and really what that does is it drives you to ways to mitigate the blast radius of attacks, mitigate the ability for bad actors to traverse across the network, taking a network approach, right? Segmentation, least privilege, all things we think about when we think about zero trust and assume breach. And within that, plays directly, that really is crux of what Danny's saying. Great presentation. It also ties directly into what Syxsense does, where we give you the ability with our automated remediations to be able to close those gaps, apply hardened configuration baselines with CIS benchmarks, with a number of other Windows configurations, with updated patches across your systems, your endpoints, and be able to continuously monitor those with protect from configuration drift, which wildly important. And it's a nice circle back to Blaze's original topic of protecting against the reversion of any type of patch update, setting change, etc. So I thought it was an excellent presentation that touched on a number of really salient points that we deal with every day. It was extremely practical. So it was extremely, every single IT practitioner can glean something out of this, I believe. So flipping it back over to you, JC, as the MC here. Your thoughts on across, Threat Locker, anything you want to add to what Blaze has to say? Just want to open this up to discussion right now.
Going right back to yours, I think he had a slide that basically mentioned, and this is kind of an accountability issue, I guess, in which, we're always trying to, or how do I say this? We're afraid of course, being attacked. I mean, we have intentional attacks that are clearly, occurring all the time, and we're reacting to them, right? Or we're proactively setting controls. Well, we may not actually be looking at the right controls, right? Because you have unintentional backdoors. I think you talked a bit about vulnerabilities. Yeah, they're concerning, but what about your weaponization of, features that aren't considered malicious in any way? Allowing PowerShell to an end user that clearly shouldn't have it, I think was his example. I mean, yeah, going back, of course, to controls and following frameworks. And, that's the end of one of the recommendations from the Copilot topic I chose as well. Follow your frameworks, follow the standards, rather, that you should be setting proactively. And of course, I could talk about zero trust all day. I don't want to bring up the topic. We all know it by this time, but it's not about words. It's obviously about actions, and put those actions into play. And don't allow any, not just access to features that could lead to something that we know would be malicious, but something that we're not even thinking about. Providing access to software that's just there. Is it being used? No, we'll get rid of it.
Exactly.
I think I think we have a great representation of something like this. So one of the things that Danny Jenkins brought up, I think at the beginning, is he asked everybody, what's more secure, being on-prem or in the cloud? And the problem is, it's like kind of like asking what's healthier, vaping or smoking a cigarette. They're both unhealthy. They both have their own drawbacks. And so when even talking about exploitation, we can obviously talk about CrowdStrike. It wasn't a maliciously exploited problem, but it was essentially access to some service that maybe they shouldn't have access to, or just kind of like even assuming breach. Okay, what happens when we make this change? Oh, we bring the globe down. Okay, we should probably work more to kind of understand that. And so all this kind of ties in together, as well as with Copilot. If you give access to some of these controls, you kind of have to understand the drawbacks at the same time. So if it's going to create something in your calendar, well, think about what it could send out to your users as well. And then what could it exfiltrate from them, or even get an understanding? Oh, okay, we have this kind of privileged access with another domain. And so now they have access into your customers or one of your partners or something. So there's all these things that we need to keep in mind, which is what I like, kind of the idea of what I think Copilot Hunter was kind of the goal of it, was to understand what is in place, what does it have access to, and then try to mitigate around it. So I like the idea of assume breach and then kind of building around that to kind of get hopefully security first kind of approach to some of these new ideas and software and applications coming out.
For sure. Just to touch on the Copilot topic real quick, because I did love that presentation as well. There's a lot of Copilot speech and LLM talk at Black Hat, obviously for good reason. And it's interesting, but not surprising how much low-hanging fruit Copilot is right now, and just LLMs in general. I think what people don't, see or realize the way the space is going is just all the components around it, whether it be, small language models, whether it be, basically on-prem versions of ChatGPT, stuff like, Olama, stuff you can do within Hugging Face, etc. That really, I don't want to say it didn't take a security first approach, because I'd like to be optimistic about the industry, but it's kind of a reminder to take a step back sometimes, think about security, embed it more into our processes, because we don't want to be dealing with the tech debt of that and the security debt of that in the future. But
one of those things that Copilot is looking to do is subvert or avoid those securities we have in place, which makes the whole process difficult on purpose. And so when you give access to these controls, you're providing that your credentials or something, because those things are in place, your multi-factor, however it kind of avoids those types of controls in order to make your life easier. Those things are in place for a reason. And the idea of kind of maintaining that kind of security while still gaining insight into your environment is an important balancing act that needs to, one, be described to, us as administrators within the account, understanding what's being provided and what kind of access it has, but also, not burdening it down so much that it actually can't do what it's supposed to do. But that was something I got from a talk. I don't remember who, but of course, it's difficult for security because we put in all these things to make it difficult. So whenever we subvert it with these controls, we need to make sure we maintain the security so that we don't lose it.
Well, great word. Yeah, exactly. Liz. Awesome. So I think we're coming up to time here, JC.
Yeah,
parting
yeah,
message,
absolutely.
Final thoughts.
Well, a quick response to something you guys just mentioned, and another talk that I did actually watch as well, which doesn't really have much to do with what I normally do. This is more angled at developers, but I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Chris from Veracode, Wysopal, I think, had a presentation from How to Halt regarding basically security and leveraging AI to bolster abilities for developers and creating secure code. He joked a bunch of times throughout his presentation about how developers never develop initially anything that's secure the entire time. But going back to another term, obviously used security debt as well. He had some stats. I think I pulled up the slide in one of my notes here. 45% of organizations have critical security debt. Again, he was angling it at developers and coding in a more secure fashion, thinking about it first rather than just focusing on efficiency. And especially when developers don't have enough knowledge, they might just be getting enough done just to make the project work. That's obviously not enough. If AI is, I guess, the additional padding there to enable it, I mean, I would say that I'm for it. But I thought that was also an interesting topic. I don't know if you guys caught that one, but another one I'd recommend.
I did not, but yes, it sounds juicy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that wraps up our coverage of Black Hat 2024. Hope you guys found our discussion on the critical topics insightful and helps you navigate the ever-evolving cybersecurity landscape. But before we close, some other mentions as well, special shout-outs to additional topics that we watched. Super Hat Trick, exploit Chrome and Firefox 4 times. Deep dive into browser vulnerabilities. Secure Shells and Shambles was another session that exposed some shocking vulnerabilities in SSH. Relationships Matter, reconstructing the organizational and social structure of a ransomware gang, very eye-opening, and to the actual, again, social structure of these organizations. And what I thought was the most impactful out of any of them, this is just my opinion, guys, but behind enemy lines, engaging and disrupting ransomware web panels. I think his name was Vangelis, security researcher who really, I would say that it's thought-provoking discussion that at least left me pondering the ethical implementations of hacking back. The questions at the end, which they decided to throw into some of the recordings, were kind of interesting because most of the time they cut the session, but the questions at the end asking Vangelis, how do you feel about this? What regulations did you actually get concerned about? He said, I ignored everything. I just did everything hacking back basically in what I thought mattered most to the general good.
That's awesome. I haven't
really
seen that one. I'm gonna check that one out. That one sounds really, really awesome.
Definitely. I'd say it was one of the best sessions. Of course, these sessions, along with many discussed, highlight the diversity and depth of content at Black Hat this year. I think it was a great year. Each one contributes to our understanding of the complexities we face in security and the ongoing debate around ethics, particularly when it comes to engaging adversaries. I'd also be remiss not to mention the Omdia Analysts Summit, which also ran concurrently with Black Hat. One particularly impactful presentation that I caught was focused on managing risk in security services. The session delved into the complexities of adopting new security services, highlighting not only the risks that can address, but the risks that we can address, but rather the potential vulnerabilities introduced, obviously, when partnering with new vendors. It also offered valuable recommendations on setting risk tolerances and customizing security strategies to fit your organization's unique needs. As we continue to innovate and collaborate in the field of cybersecurity, it is, of course, crucial to stay informed and prepared for both the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. Really, thank you, everyone, for joining us for Black Hat 2024 Unwrapped. We hope to see you again soon, whether it's at the next big conference or right here in another deep dive into the world of security. If you have any questions or would like to provide more context to any of the topics discussed today, of course, we would love to hear it. Please let us know. Until then, stay secure and stay ahead of the curve.